How does a man stay calm when his own family laughs as he's told he isn't welcome anymore? Why did Christmas still happen after that, but without the money everyone depended on? This is how I stopped paying quietly and let the consequences speak instead. My name is Damon Vosil, and at 58, I've learned that the difference between being valued and being used often comes down to a single moment of clarity. Mine arrived wrapped in a fortune cookie, delivered by the small hands of my 7-year-old granddaughter during what would become the last family dinner I'd ever pay for. The November evening felt ordinary enough as I pulled into Elara's driveway, my trunk loaded with the usual contributions, wine from the shop she liked, desserts from the bakery downtown, and the catering receipt tucked in my wallet alongside the others. These gatherings had become routine. I arrived with provisions, sat through dinner, listened to plans that involved my money but rarely my presence, and drove home lighter in both pocket and spirit. Elara's dining room buzzed with the familiar cast. My daughter moved efficiently between kitchen and table, her movements practiced but distant. Rowan, her husband, dominated the conversation with stories from his consulting business, the one I'd been quietly funding for 3 years. Little Mara bounced between adults, the only one who seemed genuinely happy to see me. "Grandpa Damon," she called, rushing over with a plate of misshapen cookies. "I made fortune cookies in my cooking class. Everyone gets one." The cookies looked nothing like the crisp crescents from restaurants. These were lumpy, slightly burned at the edges, clearly the work of small hands and big ambitions. But Mara's pride transformed them into something precious. "Did you write the fortunes yourself?" I asked, accepting the cookie she pressed into my palm. "Some of them," she said, already moving to distribute the rest. Teacher helped with the hard words. Around the table, others cracked their cookies open. Rowan read his aloud. "Good luck follows hard work." He chuckled. "Well, that's accurate enough." Elara said something about friendship. The neighbor who'd joined us got "Travel brings wisdom." Each fortune sparked brief commentary, light laughter, the comfortable noise of people enjoying a shared moment. I broke mine carefully, preserving the cookie pieces for Mara's sake. The slip of paper inside was slightly larger than the others, folded twice instead of once. I unfolded it slowly, expecting something innocuous about success or happiness. The words hit like cold water. "You're not welcome at Christmas." The room continued its chatter around me. I read it again, certain I'd misunderstood. But the message remained unchanged, written in what looked like Mara's careful printing, though some letters appeared darker, as if traced over by an adult hand. "Well?" Rowan called from across the table. "What's your fortune, Damon?" I looked up to find all eyes on me. The room had grown quiet, expectant. I glanced at Mara, but she was focused on her own cookie, oblivious to the tension that had suddenly thickened the air. "You're not welcome at Christmas," I read aloud. Silence fell like a curtain. Then Rowan burst into laughter, loud, performative, filling the space with a sound that felt more like breaking glass than joy. "Oh, that's rich," he said, slapping the table. "Even the fortune cookies are telling it like it is." Others joined in, nervous chuckles and forced smiles. Elara's laugh sounded hollow, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. The neighbor looked uncomfortable but smiled anyway, following the room's lead. "It's just a joke," someone said. "Kids say the funniest things." But I'd seen Mara's confusion when the laughter started, her small face creasing with concern. She hadn't understood why her creation had caused such a reaction. This wasn't her joke. It was someone else's message, delivered through her innocent hands. I folded the slip of paper carefully, creasing it along its original lines, and slipped it into my wallet. Then I smiled, the same calm smile I'd perfected in 30 years of business negotiations. "Well," I said, "that's certainly direct." The conversation moved on, but something fundamental had shifted. I sat through the rest of dinner, participating when addressed, nodding at plans for holiday gatherings I apparently wouldn't attend. When Rowan mentioned the venue they'd chosen for Christmas dinner, the expensive one downtown, I didn't offer to cover it as I usually would. When Elara talked about Mara's gift list, I simply listened. As I prepared to leave, Mara hugged my legs tightly. "Did you like your cookie, Grandpa?" "It was very well made," I told her truthfully. "You're getting good at baking." She beamed, and I realized that whatever message had found its way into that cookie, she'd been an unwitting messenger. The real authors were still in that dining room, probably congratulating themselves on their clever delivery method. I drove home slowly, the fortune slip heavy in my wallet. 23 years of marriage to Iris, 32 years of raising Elara, 7 years of being a grandfather, and it had come to this. A message baked into a child's craft project, delivered in front of an audience for maximum impact. But as I pulled into my own driveway, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in years, the expectations were clear. I wasn't welcome at Christmas. Finally, an honest communication from my family. I could work with honesty. The pattern hadn't developed overnight. Looking back, I could trace its evolution through 1,000 small moments, each one seeming reasonable in isolation. It started after Elara's divorce from her first husband, when she'd moved back home with baby Mara. "Just until I get back on my feet," she'd promised. I'd been happy to help. What father wouldn't want to support his daughter through a difficult transition? The temporary arrangement stretched into months, then years. When Elara met Rowan, I'd been cautiously optimistic. He seemed stable, ambitious, ready to take on the responsibility of a ready-made family. Their wedding was beautiful. I'd been honored to pay for it. But stable and ambitious, I learned, didn't necessarily mean financially independent. Rowan's consulting business launched with great fanfare and my money. "Just a bridge loan," he'd assured me over dinner at the restaurant I was paying for. 6 months, maybe 8, until the contracts start flowing. 8 months became 18. 18 became 36. The business existed in a perpetual state of almost success, always one big client away from profitability, always needing just a little more capital to reach that mythical break-even point. Meanwhile, the family's lifestyle expanded to fill the space my money provided. The small apartment became a rental house, then a purchased home with my help on the down payment. Elara's part-time job became no job at all. Why work when Rowan's business was about to take off, and when I was there to cover any gaps? The requests became assumptions. Phone calls that started with, "I need," instead of, "Could you help?" Text messages with payment amounts and deadlines. Group chats where my contributions were discussed like weather patterns, predictable, reliable, requiring no gratitude because they required no effort on their part. I'd enabled it all with the best intentions. Every payment came with the justification of family loyalty, temporary assistance, investment in their future. I told myself I was being generous, supportive, the kind of father and grandfather who put family first. But generosity requires appreciation to remain generous. Without it, it becomes something else entirely. Obligation. And obligations, I'd discovered, breed resentment in both directions. The group chat on my phone told the story clearly. I scrolled through months of messages, seeing the pattern with new clarity. Christmas venue booked, $2,800 for the private room. Damon, can you transfer by Friday? Mara needs winter clothes, sending you the shopping list. Rowan's business insurance is due, the usual amount. No, please. No, thank you. No question about whether I could afford it, whether I wanted to contribute, whether I had any input on how the money was spent. I'd become a financial appliance, useful, reliable, and invisible, until something broke. The holiday planning messages were particularly telling. Discussions about menu, decorations, guest lists, all proceeding without my input. My role was clearly defined. Pay the bills, show up if convenient, don't complicate things with opinions or preferences. "We should do the gift exchange after dinner this year," Elara had written. "Good idea," Rowan replied. "More time for the kids to get excited. Damon's covering the venue and catering, right? Same as last year? No one had asked me. The assumption was built into the conversation like gravity, invisible but absolute. I found myself in the parking lot of the holiday planning store, watching families stream in and out with their lists and budgets, their excited children and harried expressions. Through the window, I could see elaborate displays of decorations, gift wrap, seasonal foods, all the materials for creating memorable celebrations. But I wouldn't be creating anything. I'd be funding other people's memories, paying for experiences that happened around me rather than with me. The fortune cookie had simply made explicit what had been true for years. My presence was optional, but my wallet was essential. My phone buzzed with another group chat message. "We'll send you the Christmas invoice soon. Probably around $4,500 total this year with everything." An invoice. Not a request, not an invitation to contribute, but a bill for services I hadn't ordered, for a celebration I wasn't welcome at. I sat in that parking lot for a long time, watching other families navigate their own holiday preparations. Some argued over budgets, others compromised on wish lists, but they were all engaged in the process together. Their celebrations might be smaller, simpler, less expensive than what my money could buy, but they belonged to everyone involved. When had I stopped belonging to my own family's celebrations? When had I become the ATM that funded other people's joy? The answer was uncomfortable but clear. The moment I'd stopped requiring respect as a condition of my generosity. I'd trained them to take me for granted by never making my contributions contingent on their appreciation. But training works both ways. If I'd taught them to expect unconditional financial support, I could teach them something different. The question was what lesson I wanted them to learn, and whether I was prepared to let them experience the consequences of that education. That night, I sat in my car outside Elara's house for 20 minutes after dinner ended, the fortune slip unfolded on my steering wheel. The porch light cast long shadows across the paper, making the words appear and disappear as clouds moved across the moon. "You're not welcome at Christmas." 7 words that had somehow liberated me from years of self-imposed obligation. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I had clear information about where I stood. No mixed signals, no polite pretense, no need to interpret hints or read between lines. I wasn't welcome. Finally, honesty. Back home, I settled into my office with a legal pad and the stack of financial records I kept meticulously organized. If I wasn't welcome at Christmas, it seemed reasonable to examine what my absence might look like, not just physically, but financially. The numbers told a story I'd been avoiding for years. Monthly transfers to Elara, $2,800 for mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries. Quarterly payments to Rowan's business, $15,000 average, covering payroll gaps, equipment leases, office rent. Annual education fund for Mara, $8,000 for private school, tutoring, activities. Emergency payments, $23,000 in the past year, a loan for car repairs, medical bills, home maintenance, business crises, holiday and birthday expenses, $12,000 annually for celebrations I was increasingly peripheral to. The total was staggering. Over $180,000 per year flowing from my accounts to theirs, funding a lifestyle they couldn't maintain independently. I was essentially subsidizing their entire existence, and in return, I received the privilege of being told I wasn't welcome at the celebrations my money made possible. But the most revealing discovery came when I dug deeper into Rowan's business finances. As the primary investor, I had access to the company accounts, though I'd rarely exercised that right. Trust, I'd thought. Family loyalty. What I found was a business hemorrhaging money with no realistic path to profitability. Client contracts were sparse and small. Operating expenses were wildly disproportionate to revenue. Rowan was paying himself and his 2 employees salaries that successful consultants might justify, but his company's income couldn't support a part-time secretary. The business existed entirely on my subsidies. Without my quarterly injections of capital, it would have collapsed within months of opening. Rowan wasn't running a consulting company. He was running an elaborate simulation of entrepreneurship funded by my genuine success. I leaned back in my chair, studying the spreadsheet on my computer screen. 30 years of building my own business, carefully managing risk, making hard decisions, sacrificing immediate gratification for long-term stability, and I was using that success to enable someone else's fantasy of achievement without effort. The irony was sharp. I'd succeeded in business by understanding that respect and results were interconnected, that sustainable relationships required mutual benefit, that charity without boundaries ultimately helped no one. But in my personal life, I'd abandoned every principle that had made me successful. I opened a new folder on my computer and labeled it December. The fortune slip went into my desk drawer, but its message was already burned into my memory. If I wasn't welcome at Christmas, then perhaps it was time to give them the Christmas they actually wanted, one without my presence, and everything that presence had provided. The decision, once made, brought an unexpected calm. For years, I'd been trying to solve the wrong problem. I'd focused on how to maintain relationships that had already ended, how to earn appreciation from people who'd moved beyond gratitude into entitlement. But the fortune cookie had clarified the actual situation. They didn't want a relationship with me. They wanted a relationship with my money. Those were different things entirely, and required different responses. I spent the next hour researching the legal obligations of financial support. What did I owe legally versus what I'd been providing voluntarily? The distinction was crucial. I had no intention of abandoning genuine responsibilities, but I needed to understand the difference between obligation and choice. The answer was simpler than I'd expected. I owed them nothing. Elara was a grown woman with no legal claim to my support. Rowan's business was a separate entity with no personal guarantees from me. Even Mara's education, while morally important to me, wasn't my legal responsibility. Everything I'd been providing was voluntary, which meant everything I'd been providing could stop. The question wasn't whether I had the right to end my financial support. I clearly did. The question was whether I was prepared to let them experience the natural consequences of their choices, and whether I could maintain my decision when the reality of those consequences became clear. I thought about the fortune cookie again, about the laughter that had greeted its message, about the casual cruelty of using a child to deliver rejection. They'd been so confident in their position, so certain that I would continue funding their lives regardless of how they treated me. That confidence was about to be tested. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the family group chat one more time, reading months of assumptions and demands with new eyes. Tomorrow, I would start making some calls, not to argue or explain or negotiate, but simply to stop participating in a dynamic that had stopped serving anyone involved. They'd told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas. I was about to show them what my absence actually looked like. The next morning, I called Caleb North, my accountant for the past 15 years. Caleb was the kind of professional I valued most, methodical, discreet, focused on facts rather than feelings. I need a comprehensive review of all recurring payments and transfers, I told him over coffee in his office. Everything going out to family members, their businesses, any accounts where I'm covering expenses. Caleb didn't ask why. He simply opened his laptop and began pulling up records, his fingers moving efficiently across the keyboard. Numbers appeared on his screen in neat columns, painting a detailed picture of my financial entanglements. "Here's what I see," he said after 20 minutes of focused work. Monthly automated transfers to Elara's accounts averaging $2,800. Quarterly business capital injections to Rowan's LLC varying between $12,000 and $18,000. Annual education payments for Mara's school. Insurance premiums where you're listed as the payor but not the beneficiary. He scrolled through more entries. Holiday and event payments usually clustered around December, March, and July. Emergency transfers. These are irregular but frequent. Medical payments, automotive, home maintenance, business equipment. What's the annual total? Last year was $184,000. This year is tracking slightly higher. I absorbed this figure quietly. Nearly $200,000 flowing out of my accounts to support people who'd just told me I wasn't welcome at their celebrations. From a legal standpoint, I continued, what are my actual obligations here? Caleb's expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of understanding in his eyes. None, he said simply. These are all voluntary transfers. You're not legally responsible for supporting your adult daughter or her husband's business. Even the educational payments for your granddaughter. Those are generous, but not required. And the business investments? Those were structured as capital contributions, not loans. You have no legal obligation to continue funding operations. The existing agreements allow you to cease contributions at any time with 30 days' notice. I nodded, processing the information. I want to end all voluntary payments. Everything that isn't legally mandated stops as of January 1st. All of them? Caleb asked, his tone neutral but questioning. All of them. He made notes on his legal pad. I'll need to review each account and payment schedule. Some can be canceled immediately, others require notice periods. The business funding will need formal notification to comply with your investment agreement. How long until everything stops? Most payments can be halted by December 15th. The business funding will continue through December but end January 1st. I'll prepare all the necessary documentation. Our meeting concluded with handshakes and timelines. Caleb would handle the mechanics, I would handle the consequences. My next stop was Lena Brooks' law office. Lena had handled my business legal work for years, and I trusted her judgment on complex matters. I want to ensure I'm protected legally, I explained after outlining my plan. I'm ending financial support for family members, and I expect there may be pushback. Lena reviewed the documentation Caleb had provided, her expression thoughtful. Your position is solid, she said finally. You have no legal obligation to continue voluntary support. However, I recommend we document your decision clearly, establish a timeline, and create a paper trail showing that this was a deliberate choice rather than financial hardship on your part. Meaning if anyone tries to claim you abandoned responsibilities or acted out of spite, we can demonstrate that you made a rational business decision to cease voluntary charitable giving to family members who explicitly stated you weren't welcome in their lives. She pulled out a legal pad and began drafting language. I'll prepare a formal notice for Rowan's business, documenting the end of capital contributions. For the personal payments, we'll create a record showing the voluntary nature of past support and your decision to redirect those funds. Redirect them where? That's up to you. Investments, charitable giving, savings. The key is showing that you're not withholding support out of malice, but rather reallocating resources that were always yours to control. I liked Lena's approach. Clean, documented, defensible. The final stop was my bank, where I met with the branch manager to review all automatic payments and transfers. The list was longer than I'd remembered. Utilities, insurance, credit card payments, business expenses, all flowing seamlessly from my accounts to theirs. I need all of these canceled, I said, highlighting the relevant entries. Effective immediately where possible, otherwise as soon as the terms allow. The manager was professional, but curious. This is quite a few accounts, Mr. Vosil. Are you sure you want to cancel everything at once? I'm sure. She walked me through each cancellation, explaining notice periods and final payment dates. Most would stop within days. The largest transfers would continue through December, but end with the new year. As I signed the final paperwork, she handed me a confirmation sheet listing all the changes. Seeing it in writing made the decision feel final, irreversible. These accounts will receive notice of the cancellations, she explained. They'll have time to make alternative arrangements. Alternative arrangements. I almost smiled at the phrase. For years I'd been their only arrangement. Now they'd need to discover what they could actually afford, what their lives looked like when funded by their own efforts rather than my success. The drive home felt different, lighter somehow. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of other people's financial obligations. My money was my own again, free to be saved or spent or invested according to my preferences rather than their demands. That evening, I sat in my office reviewing the day's paperwork. Cancellation confirmations, legal notices, account closure documents, the administrative debris of disentanglement. My phone buzzed with a text from the family group chat. Reminder: Christmas venue payment is due Friday, $2,800. I read the message twice, then set my phone aside without responding. Friday would come and go without payment from me. The venue would contact them about the outstanding balance. They'd scramble to find alternative funding or make different arrangements. And I would spend that Friday doing something I hadn't done in years, making plans for my own Christmas, funded by my own money, shared with people who actually wanted my company. The fortune cookie had been right about one thing: I wasn't welcome at their Christmas. But I was beginning to realize that might be the best gift I'd received in years. December arrived with its usual flurry of activity, but for the first time in years, none of that activity involved me. I watched from a distance as the family group chat buzzed with holiday preparations, each message a reminder of how peripheral my actual presence had become to their celebrations. Venue confirmed for Christmas dinner, Elara wrote. They're holding our reservation. Gift shopping this weekend? Rowan added. Mara's list is getting expensive, but it's Christmas, right? Don't forget the catering deposit, someone replied, and we need to confirm the wine selection. I scrolled through these messages with detached interest, like reading about strangers' plans in a newspaper. The assumption of my financial participation was so deeply embedded in their thinking that they couldn't imagine an alternative scenario. But behind the cheerful planning, cracks were beginning to show. Rowan's business was the first domino to wobble. Without my quarterly capital injection, his operating account began running thin. Payroll became irregular, then late. His 2 employees started asking pointed questions about payment schedules and company stability. I learned this through Caleb, who maintained professional relationships with several local business accountants. Word traveled quickly in our city's small business community when companies started struggling with basic obligations. Rowan's been calling around looking for emergency funding, Caleb mentioned during our weekly check-in. Apparently, he's behind on rent, payroll, and supplier payments. Has he contacted you directly? I asked. Not yet, but I expect he will soon. I nodded. Rowan's pride had always been his weakness. He'd exhaust every other option before admitting he needed help, especially from me. But mathematics didn't care about pride, and his business mathematics were unsustainable without my support. Meanwhile, Elara was discovering the reality of managing a household budget without unlimited backup funding. The mortgage payment had gone through. That was automated from her account. But the utilities, insurance, and credit cards that I'd been covering were generating overdue notices. She called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice carefully controlled. Dad, there seems to be some kind of problem with the utility payments. They're saying the account is behind, but I thought you were handling those. I was, I replied calmly. I'm not anymore. Silence stretched across the connection. What do you mean? I mean I'm no longer paying your utilities, or your insurance, or your credit cards, or any of the other expenses I've been covering. But why? The question surprised me with its genuine confusion. After the fortune cookie incident, after years of being treated like an ATM, she couldn't understand why I might stop providing unlimited financial support. Because I'm not welcome at Christmas, I said simply. It seemed appropriate to adjust my contributions accordingly. That was just a joke, Dad. Mara didn't understand what she was writing. Someone understood. Someone made sure that message reached me in front of an audience for maximum effect. Whether it was Mara's idea or not, it represented someone's feelings. Another pause. So you're punishing us? I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply stopping voluntary payments that were never required or appreciated. You're all adults. You can manage your own expenses. The call ended shortly after, with vague promises to figure things out and talk more later. But I noticed she didn't apologize for the fortune cookie incident, didn't acknowledge years of unappreciated support, didn't even ask if we could repair the relationship that had led to this point. She was focused entirely on the money. As December progressed, the holiday planning messages in the group chat began taking on a different tone. The venue needs final payment by the 20th. Can we split it 3 ways this year? Catering costs more than expected. Anyone have ideas for cutting expenses? Maybe we should do gifts differently this year. Set a lower spending limit? I watched these conversations with anthropological interest. For the first time, they were confronting the actual cost of their celebrations, discovering what their holidays looked like when funded by their own resources, rather than mine. The venue they'd chosen was expensive. I'd paid for it the previous 2 years without question. The catering was elaborate, the wine selection premium, the gift expectations generous. All of it had been possible because I'd been writing the checks. Now they were learning the difference between what they wanted and what they could afford. Rowan's business situation deteriorated rapidly. One of his employees quit after a paycheck bounced. The office landlord began demanding immediate payment of back rent. Suppliers put his accounts on hold pending payment of outstanding invoices. He finally called me on December 18th, his voice tight with controlled desperation. "Damon, I need to discuss the quarterly funding. There seems to have been some kind of delay." "There's no delay," I replied. "There's no funding." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm no longer investing in your business. The capital contributions ended with my last payment in September." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then, "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. But the business will fail without that funding. You know that." "Yes," I agreed. "I do know that." "So you're deliberately destroying my company?" "I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply no longer subsidizing it. If your business model requires my ongoing investment to survive, then it's not actually a viable business." The conversation devolved from there, with Rowan cycling through anger, bargaining, and threats. But underneath all the emotion, the mathematics remained unchanged. His business had never been profitable, had never generated enough revenue to sustain itself, had existed entirely as an expensive simulation of entrepreneurship. Without my funding, that simulation was ending. Christmas Eve arrived gray and cold, with the kind of persistent drizzle that made everything look subdued. I spent the morning in my office, catching up on reading, responding to emails from actual business associates who valued my time and expertise. My phone remained quiet. No last-minute invitations, no emergency calls, no desperate attempts to restore the old dynamic. Either they'd found alternative funding for their celebrations, or they'd scaled back to match their actual resources. Around noon, I received a single text from Elara. "Christmas dinner is canceled. I hope you're happy." I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. I wasn't happy about the cancellation. I was simply unsurprised by it. They'd built their celebration around my money rather than our relationships, and when the money stopped, the celebration collapsed. But that collapse wasn't my responsibility to prevent or my failure to mourn. That evening, I drove to a small restaurant downtown, one that stayed open for people who wanted a quiet Christmas Eve meal. The dining room was half full of other people spending the holiday differently than tradition might expect, some by choice, others by circumstance, all of us finding our own way through the season. I ordered wine, a good meal, and dessert, paying for it with money that had once funded other people's happiness. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was having a better Christmas Eve than I'd had in years, precisely because I was spending it alone. My phone buzzed once during dinner, another message from the family group chat that I glanced at but didn't read. Whatever crisis or complaint or demand it contained could wait. For the first time in longer than I could remember, Christmas was about what I wanted rather than what I could provide. and what I wanted was the quiet satisfaction of a decision made clearly, executed completely, and owned without apology. The call came on December 27th at 7:23 in the morning. I was drinking coffee in my kitchen, reading news on my tablet, enjoying the peaceful rhythm of a day with no obligations except the ones I chose. "We need to talk." Elara's voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the fractures underneath. "Can you come over this morning?" "About what?" "You know about what." I did know, of course. The bills had come due, literally and figuratively. Christmas had passed without my funding, and now they were confronting the mathematical reality of their choices. "I'll be there in an hour," I said. The drive to Elara's house felt familiar and strange at the same time. I'd made this trip hundreds of times over the years, usually carrying groceries or gifts, often arriving to solve some crisis or cover some unexpected expense. This time, I brought only myself. Elara answered the door before I could knock. Her face was drawn, her usual careful composure replaced by something rawer, more desperate. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. The house felt different, quieter, somehow diminished. Mara was presumably still asleep, and Rowan was nowhere to be seen. Elara led me to the dining room where the fortune cookie incident had occurred, and I wondered if the location was intentional. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the same chair I'd occupied that night. "We need to discuss this situation." I sat, folding my hands on the table. "What situation is that?" "Don't play games, Dad. You know exactly what situation. You've cut off all our funding, Rowan's business is collapsing, and we couldn't afford Christmas dinner. The venue canceled our reservation when the payment didn't come through." "I see. That's it? That's all you have to say?" I considered her question carefully. "What would you like me to say?" "I'd like you to explain why you're punishing us like this. What we did to deserve having our lives destroyed." The word punishing was interesting. It implied that my financial support had been an entitlement rather than a gift, that ending it constituted an attack rather than a boundary. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said calmly. "I'm simply no longer paying for things that aren't my responsibility." "Not your responsibility?" Her voice rose. "I'm your daughter. Mara is your granddaughter. Rowan's business is failing because it was never viable," I interrupted. "It existed entirely on my subsidies. A business that can't generate enough revenue to pay its expenses isn't actually a business. It's an expensive hobby funded by someone else's success." "So you're just going to let it fade away?" "I'm going to stop artificially keeping it alive." Elara stared at me across the table, and I could see her recalibrating, searching for a different approach. "What about Mara's school? Her activities? Are you going to punish a 7-year-old for something she had nothing to do with?" "Mara's education is important to me," I replied. "I'm happy to discuss contributing to it. But that conversation will happen between you and me privately, with clear boundaries and mutual respect. It won't be assumed or demanded or taken for granted." "Mutual respect?" She laughed bitterly. "This is how you show respect? By cutting us off without warning, destroying Christmas, ruining Rowan's business?" I reached into my wallet and pulled out the fortune slip, now creased and worn from weeks of carrying. I unfolded it carefully and placed it on the table between us. "You're not welcome at Christmas," I read aloud. That was your message to me. Delivered in front of an audience, designed for maximum humiliation, using your daughter as the messenger. Elara's face flushed. That was a mistake. Mara didn't understand. Mara didn't write this alone. Someone helped her with the hard words, remember? Someone made sure this specific message reached me in the most hurtful way possible. It was just a joke. "No," I said quietly. "It wasn't. It was the truth, finally spoken clearly. You don't want me at Christmas. You want my money at Christmas. You don't value my presence. You value my financial contributions. The fortune cookie simply made explicit what had been true for years. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. For how long have you actually wanted my company at family gatherings? Not my wallet, not my ability to pay for things, but me personally? The question hung in the air unanswered, because we both knew the answer. When did you last ask my opinion about holiday plans? When did you last invite me to participate in decisions about how my money would be spent? When did you last say thank you for the hundreds of thousands of dollars I've contributed to your lifestyle? Still silence. I've been funding a simulation of family relationships, I continued. You've been going through the motions of including me while actually resenting my presence and taking my contributions for granted. The fortune cookie was liberating because it ended the pretense. Elara's composure finally cracked. So what do you want? An apology? Groveling? What will it take to fix this? I don't want anything, I said honestly. I'm not trying to fix this relationship. I'm acknowledging that it's already broken and has been for years. You can't fix something by throwing money at it, and you can't restore respect by demanding it. Then what happens now? Now, you live within your actual means instead of mine. You make choices based on what you can afford rather than what I can provide. You discover what your life looks like when funded by your own efforts. I stood up, leaving the fortune slip on the table. If you want a relationship with me, an actual relationship, not a financial arrangement, that conversation can happen. But it starts with acknowledging what this dynamic has become and taking responsibility for your part in creating it. And if we can't afford our lifestyle without your help, then you change your lifestyle. I walked toward the door, then paused. The money I was spending on your family hasn't disappeared, Elara. It's still there, still mine to allocate as I choose. But going forward, it will go to people and causes that value the giver as much as the gift. The front door closed behind me with a soft click, final and definitive. As I drove away, I passed Rowan's office building. The parking lot was nearly empty, and I could see a notice taped to the front door, probably an eviction notice or business closure announcement. 3 years of my money gone into a venture that had never had a realistic chance of success. But the money wasn't the real loss. The real loss was the years I'd spent enabling other people's irresponsibility while neglecting my own needs and boundaries. That evening, I sat in my office and opened my laptop. The folder labeled December contained all the documentation of my disengagement, cancellation notices, legal letters, bank confirmations, the evidence of a decision made deliberately and executed completely. I created a new folder and labeled it January. It was time to start planning what I actually wanted to do with my money, my time, and my life. For the first time in years, those decisions were entirely my own. The fortune cookie had been right. I wasn't welcome at their Christmas, but I was discovering that I was perfectly welcome at my own. 6 months later, I received a graduation announcement from a scholarship program I'd begun funding. Young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds building real businesses with sustainable models. The thank you letters were handwritten, genuine, filled with appreciation for opportunities that might not have existed otherwise. My money was still changing lives and funding dreams, but now it was going to people who understood the difference between a gift and an entitlement, between support and subsidy. Elara called occasionally, brief conversations about practical matters. The house had been sold. The family moved to a smaller apartment they could actually afford. Rowan had taken a job with someone else's company, earning a salary based on his actual skills rather than my generosity. Mara was thriving in public school, and I'd quietly established an education fund for her, one managed by trustees with clear guidelines and academic requirements. She would have opportunities, but she would also understand that opportunities come with responsibilities. The fortune cookie slip remained in my desk drawer, a reminder of the day I stopped confusing financial generosity with family loyalty. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people experience the natural consequences of their choices, and sometimes being told you're not welcome is the first step toward discovering where you actually belong.